Hello and welcome to the Redwood Finance Podcast. I'm Tony Hallett, and today I'm joined by Adrian Li, finance transformation expert and longtime contributor to this podcast. Welcome, Adrian.
Hi, Tony.
And for the first time, we're also joined by Aaron Veach, who's Redwood's own Director of Finance Automation. Welcome, Aaron.
Hi, Tony.
Great to have you here for a three-pronged discussion here. And today's subject is how automation can support a resilient finance function in the new normal. There's that phrase. So we're going to get to that. But first of all, resilience. You could argue resilience has always and always will be important in finance and accounting, but probably no time more so than now. So if you look at people like analyst Gartner, they talk about three phases to the current pandemic: respond, recover, and renew. And we're really going to get to the opportunity that renew presents and the chance to reset for many organizations. And ultimately, we will talk about what this means to CFOs and the wider finance function. So, without further ado, I want to put this question to you both. Maybe Adrian first of all. So resilience, I think if we look back over the years, it has certain connotations of business continuity in a very IT sense. But I put it to you that it is much broader than that. What does resilience actually mean for the CFO and finance? How do you define it?
So for me, Tony, in simple terms, it's really about just keeping the lights on and maintaining as closely as possible the sort of business as usual, making sure that finance are able to process transactions, to close the books, to produce the information that the business needs, and so on. In order to do that, it's about sort of preventing disruption. For example, eliminating single points of failure in processes to increase resilience, but also adapting and responding to situations as they occur, which we've had with the pandemic. So for me, it's about really just keeping the lights on and maintaining as closely as possible business as usual.
You mentioned the pandemic. How much has that changed what it would have meant beforehand and now?
Yeah, so I think we talked about on previous podcasts that a lot of the disaster recovery and resilience testing has been very, very focused on sort of regions and functions within businesses. And obviously the pandemic's been global, so it's kind of hit everyone pretty much give or take within a couple of weeks at the same time. So actually losing a region to a particular, say weather or storm issue is one thing, but losing an entire team globally and having to force people to work from home is another thing. So I think that's been the fundamental difference this time in terms of how the resilience of a finance function has been challenged.
Aaron, let me put that first question back to you. What does it mean to you now, this whole idea of resilience?
Well, Tony, I think you mentioned it. Analysts have kind of looked at the different phases, and really resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And within the Office of Finance, they are always dealing with tight deadlines and restrictions, whether it be regulatory or statutory filings or reports for strategic partners and shareholders. They really don't have the opportunity to really skip a beat. They have to be resilient. And I think after post-COVID-19, a lot of CFOs and strategic leaders for that matter are not only looking at what could we do during this pandemic. Could we allow employees to work at home? Could we comply with our business transactions through a tight business continuity plan? But more importantly, they're starting to focus on what couldn't we do? And I think it's what couldn't we do, that gap that they're looking to fill, that will cause them to become more resilient going forward and even use that as a competitive advantage.
I think you're leading nicely onto the next subject we want to get to. And you kind of heard me groan when I mentioned new normal, because it's not a phrase which I like, but everyone's using it. And we started using it probably 12 years ago when there was the last big downturn. Anyway, my question really is, why is it so important for finance to hit reset and renew? As you say, sort of like, what couldn't they do before? What should and could organizations be doing in the future? Aaron, if you could continue that train of thought.
Yeah, I think that's that's an interesting concept. And again, I think once you get past the point of what couldn't we do, and you've really gone through that recovery phase, now it's looking forward and saying strategically, what could we do to become more of a strategic partner to the business, to give us a competitive advantage. And I'll give you a perfect example, during the last pandemic, COVID-19, there were many organizations that while they couldn't sell to their traditional markets, they had the agility to be able to shift, and maybe car manufacturers started to make ventilators and liquor distilleries started to make hand sanitizer. The ability to do that, you have to be agile. So we have to move from a mode in the Office of Finance where they're truly becoming a strategic business partner, and it's no longer about surviving, it's really thriving, because I think we all think it's not a matter if this happens again, it's when. And by looking how this can become a strategic advantage, it better sets us up in the future so that the new norm becomes something not just that helps us again survive, but to thrive in a changing environment and economy.
Okay, Adrian?
Yeah, I agree. It's about avoiding a repeat of the disruption that's happened. I think it's really shone a light on the single points of failure in processes, and a lot of that has been down to people. People are a single point of failure, and we've also talked about in previous podcasts the way that the shared service centre model has been established with a large number of people in a small number of shared service centres. That's actually exacerbated the issue here in terms of resilience. Having said that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this further in the podcast later, this has created an opportunity, I think, for change, and we can explore that further.
Let's get to that now, Adrian. Let's move on to one of the obvious questions, which is the opportunity for automation, and across all aspects of finance. Tell us some of what we might start to see. To you first, Adrian.
Yeah, so I think any of the processes where there's a lot of manual effort involved and manually intensive, there's a lot of handoffs and a lot of communication between people, a lot of sort of repetitive and kind of largely rule-based activities that people do, they're the sorts of things that are really ripe for automation now. And the fact that even very simple things like posting journals has been disrupted by this, because there are not the people around to post those journals, even if there are people in the business and within, if you like, local finance teams telling the shared service centre which journals need to be posted. The fact that the shared service centre has been pretty much decimated by the virus has meant that it's been difficult to process the work, but also for the CFO to have a handle on what's actually happening. Has the work been done? When will it get done? Who's working on it? Who's working right now? So I think processing of transactions like journals, I think doing reconciliation work has been severely impacted. Again, a very manually intensive activity, particularly around things like intercompany processing and balance sheet reconciliation. But also the basic stuff that people rely on finance for. So if they've got a query when they start to look at information about their service centre or cost centre, people in finance are not around to answer those questions anymore. So there's been a bit of a light shone on the fact that there's a lack of self-service in a lot of these functions, and again, a heavy reliance on people in finance. Okay,
and to Aaron, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I would agree with Adrian. I want to focus a little bit on a key thing that you said, Tony. You said, automation across everything. And yeah, I think we'll get into this a bit later, but, from my perspective, a lot of folks go in and they say, hey, we just want to focus on maybe record to report. And what we like to say is, let's automate with a purpose. And so Adrian hit on this. A lot of the things that happen during record report are typically pushed to the end of a period, which causes, longer cycle times, lots of people, lots of manual processes. But they also provide a very clear picture against two things that Adrian mentioned. Journal entries and reconciliations are two perfect process examples, that they're actually shining a light on problematic areas that are further upstream in the organization. So what I mean when you say across everything, that does mean everything. Use maybe the path that you jump on from a record to report area and journal entries specifically to understand why you may be making these manual journal entries to begin with, and what that means from a problematic perspective even further upstream. And this is really organizational wide. So organizational problems, this is a mindset, could be changed by starting a new strategic initiative within the Office of Finance.
I want to talk about how listeners to this podcast, if they're not started already, how can they get started on this path? And I think the natural place to go is maybe some very tactical kind of point solutions. But as you're saying, Aaron, there's a whole range of automation that's possible. But what happens first? Like customizing ERP. People have used RPA, some with and without success at times. Adrian, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of tactical focus on particularly the deployment of automation tools. I've seen a lot of this in shared service centers and in finance functions, pretty much across the board in many different industries. And that is why a lot of the investment hasn't delivered the benefits that were initially thought that would accrue from this. And it's that tactical approach that's been the problem. Aaron alluded to the fact that a lot of the work in finance is caused by or created by downstream and upstream processes that are not working optimally. So by its very nature, this has to be a strategic end-to-end initiative. You have to look at end-to-end processes, not the bit of the process that finance does. So really, it has to be a strategic, a transformational, an end-to-end, a global initiative to make this thing work and to deliver the best value from the investments.
Now, Aaron, I mean, from Redwood's point of view, if you're trying to build resilience, is what Adrian said about the end-to-end, is that a key thing?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I would echo that. Plus, I would say, as Adrian well knows, is that every organization has their processes and none of them are standard across organizations. So what they typically do is they will customize their ERP, or they'll buy point solutions, or they'll buy tactical automation, as we like to call it, such as an RPA tool, and they'll apply those automations incrementally, and they're really just trying to fix a symptom, but they're not fixing the problem. And what this does is this creates complexity when you have many technologies sitting on non-standard processes across different parts of a business. And a lot of times those gaps that aren't being filled by technology are filled by people. And then you create people and spreadsheets and workflows and emails, which then exasperates the problem. And from a technical perspective, you created huge technical debt as you've customized ERPs and you add point solutions and different technologies on top of really, in some cases, just bad processes. And I think this does lead to very small incremental automation gains that at the end of the day simply don't meet the goals of the automation destination where most organizations want to go, which leaves them very unfulfilled and unsatisfied on their automation journey. And so they need to look for a platform that can sit across people, process, and technology and harmonize and bring those processes together and be able to manage it from a single perspective so that they actually can achieve their automation destination.
I love that explanation. Thank you, Aaron. That's great. I want to really bring it together with a question which we often pose towards the end of these podcasts. So it's our old question. And I don't know who I'm putting this to first, but what's the one thing CFOs should take away from this? What's the most important action they can take? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, for me, I think there's an unique opportunity here. Finance is ripe for change. People are expecting change. So, that one of the blockers that exists is pretty much been mitigated by what's happened. So really, it's all about looking at the opportunity to transform the finance function using automation and other enablers. But the main thing is to engage the entire team and to make this a strategic global initiative, not just a finance initiative. And I think that's the single thing that needs to be taken away from this. It's strategic, it's global, it's not tactical and finance only.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, I would agree with Adrian 100%. I mean, take a top-down approach to drive the automation strategy. Define your destination, stay on the path. I mean, this is really an organizational change. It's an organizational mindset. And the one thing that I would say is that the new normal doesn't have to be normal. Let's change the paradigm.
This is fantastic. So guys, we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you to both Adrian and Aaron. Thanks for being here for the first time and for the whatever time, Adrian, in your case. I want to just say that it's been fascinating, really sort of trying to get to the bottom of what resilience means. We've heard about the people, processes, and technologies, the alchemy of all those things together, getting it right. How proper automation, if I can say that, is strategic. It's not tactical. And I love the point from Adrian there about engaging the entire team, not just the finance function. So guys, this has been full of insights. Again, thank you both for being here. I've been Tony Hallett. Please look out for the next Redwood podcast and related information at the link on this podcast. Thanks again, guys.